welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a bit of a tapestry of various things, and it's going to be including a kind of enlightenment to enlightenment, a look at enlightenment to enlightenment. Enlightenment in the sense of Buddhism and East and the Dharma, that can be quite different to the idea when it's heard about enlightenment in various different times and places in Western culture. And peaks of achievement and relief of suffering. It comes in and just pinnacles of achievement and things. There always seems to be in some ways sort of often a tinge of non-conformity and challenge to the system. When you look at the sort of different works of human intellect, and sometimes you can trace an evolution of ideas from the Enlightenment era also into contemporary voices, which are triumphing, heralding, advocating these challenges to conventional wisdom. Various people along the time, from the age of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, who was advocating for free speech and individual liberty, and he was inspiring movements for social reform. So let's just look at the Voltaire sphere. Using often, as many people do, wit and sharp and clever and often satirical wit to cut through tyrannical powers or just unfairness, or to expose bogus and false, so that if there are aristocrats who are clinging to an oppressive regime, or they're just unfairly put into power through birthright or so on. And this is in common with the Buddha. In the Buddha, there were many people who had very little skill or virtue in leadership, getting into positions of power and roles, and they were being upheld and supported by the Brahminical system, for example. And he was resigning his own position of inheritance in order to create a system that was going to affect millions and millions of people and was going to create a more fair world. Voltaire inspiring movements for social and political reform. So this is a common theme, is the transition from unfairness to fairness. Another person, John Locke. Let's go take a look at John Locke. He's someone also of the age of Enlightenment thinkers. Let's go to that sphere. Take a look at some of the aspects. An advocate for equality and stood against discrimination and injustice. So you see that as well, and defender of freedom of thought, and he fought against censorship and dogmatism, about knowledge being derived from sensory experience. And again, this is in common with the Siddhartha Gautama. He actually was persuading people to not just take things on faith, but to use their own experience and their own what they can observe as a yardstick. So this also parallels the idea of enlightenment between the West and the East in terms of Buddhism only. I don't want to generalize about Eastern ideas. You often get a very biased version. the belief is there in the potential for human improvement and enlightenment, because many views like of predestiny, fate, or that you just can't do anything about it, which often comes about often when people are under several dictatorships, they get a sense that life is kind of struggling, is pointless, that you can never achieve anything on your own. So his contributions also to political philosophy and epistemology: John Locke, father of liberalism, pioneered ideas of individual rights, and also limited government, which that reduces the chance of a tyranny and a rejection of authoritarianism. Okay, so a great icon of liberty. Then we have ideas, for example, that came out during the Romantic period, when we have another form of tyranny, which was the tyranny of industrialisation, where it was quite possible that many of the benefits of community, tradition, family, that were going to get blown apart through the response of industrialisation, which was going to uproot and replace many of the conventional benefits. I'm sorry. Let's just zoom into another, because I swore there was a... Go on, go to it. So we just take a look at some of the views with the German Romantics. No, oh gosh, it's not as easy as it looks. Okay, we'll look at one of them anyway. I believe we will. Okay, we won't do that then. Why not? Okay, I'll go on the different route. Sorry, there's an American system. Schlegel, the German Romantics. So we have one version here. Yeah, that's not going to tell us much. Another one there. A Hegel here and a Schlegel there, as my friend said. So it's just got a couple of names of some of them here. I'm going to have to create a sphere specifically for the German Romantics. I thought I had done this as the... Okay, well, I'll do that next time. So let's skip over the German Romantics. Well, we can visit some of them individually, like the Schlegels. If I can spell it right. So let's take a look in there. Taken from Roots of Buddhist Romanticism. The Natural Philosophy. Schlegel and Hölderlin. As we saw in the preceding chapter, Schlegel and Hölderlin maintained that freedom meant... Can't I get the... Come on, there should be a drop-down box and it's not appearing. Here it is. When it appears, we can hardly... Yeah. As we saw in the preceding chapter, Schlegel and Hölderlin maintained that freedom meant being free to contradict oneself from moment to moment. So, to get more aware of some of the aspects of Romanticism, what's actually in their sort of manifesto. This oneness meant adopting whatever philosophy allowed for the greatest freedom in expressing, again at any moment, one's creative powers. So if it's Hinduism or it's pantheism or it's Greek, but it allows you to be expressive in a kind of sort of, sounds like jazz kind of approach in a way. That one is the one. So because they have somewhat of a view of vitalism in some senses, that's... why are you doing that? Oh, because I'm zooming in the wrong way. That's why it goes in grainy. Schlegel and Hölderlin, thus for them, one's duty was to follow the needs of one's inner nature. For both of them, Schlegel and Hölderlin, one's duty was to follow the needs of one's inner nature as expressed in one's emotions, so as to experience inner oneness. That's the kind of thing when we're talking about German Romanticism, that's the kind of thing, specifically about the views. These are taken from Tanisaro's work, Roots of Buddhist Romanticism, which was heavily influenced by Roots of Romanticism with Isaiah Berlin. So these are major, Schlegel, these are major inconsistencies. The Romantics, with their attitude towards inconsistency, might have argued that inconsistencies of this sort are actually a form of freedom, which, as Schlegel commented, is the whole purpose of formulating these religious views to begin with. The forms of freedom, kind of do what you want to do. And it's also a culture that's being released from the tyranny of the Catholic Church during that era as well. So you can see also these kind of responses to freedom and towards nonconformity as well. August Schlegel, the elder of the two brothers, and an influential person in there, Fichte, who associated with them, with the two of them. And also with Schleiermacher, Schelling, and Tieck. Other people, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was frequently having to flee after abusing and insulting authoritarian figures such as the Church, Catholic Church. Okay, we won't go into all of those. Goethe is also in there. See, very, very creative people, playwright in this sense, and he was a big influence on Schlegel. So once you get into playwriting and drama and blurring the boundaries between aesthetics and creativity and philosophy, the expansiveness that's needed in creativity, whether it's animation, drawing, writing, screenplays, that can affect your relationship to the imagination, for example. Okay, let's move on. So August Schlegel was also someone, probably, I wonder myself whether he was named after Augustine of Hippo, who was a very prominent Christian. Put a space after August Schlegel. I think that's where we are. Okay, not too much about him. His younger brother, we've got a bit more to say about. But Schlegel was 1767, 1845. He translated Indian epics like the Ramayana, and he also laid the foundation for comparative literature studies, which was a new thing. Enlightenment figures and also the non-conformity route, Baruch Spinoza, his getting thrown out of his community in Holland, Jewish community in Amsterdam, 1632, 1677. He was challenging religious orthodoxy with his rationalist philosophy. And later thinkers, let's have a look at who else. He shows up in the history of psychiatry. Let's see what he comes under there. 1677, that's his death, leaving ethics demonstrated in geometrical order. Why is that in the history of psychiatry then? Demonstrating geometrical order, part 2, focusing on the human mind and body, disputing Descartes and arguing that they are one. And part 3, attempting to show that moral concepts such as good and evil, virtue and perfection have a basis in human psychology. So the separation of morality and the almost like the church and the state idea separation is being focused on there. But also the oneness was a big part of the Romantics philosophy. Let's have a look. He was also in the philosophy of religion, but I think he's probably just mentioned as a name there. Yeah, just mentioned as a name. And then the scientific timeline. Interested to see how our Jewish polymath shows up in a scientific timeline. So he's managing to span. That's a different Baruch. I didn't put the surname in as well. And Western philosophers in general. Okay, Baruch Spinoza, he challenged religious orthodoxy with rationalist philosophy, influencing later thinkers like Immanuel Kant and Friedrich Nietzsche. Let's have a look at Kant. A priori knowledge, a posteriori knowledge, one of his key ideas. Mentioned in the Age of Enlightenment Thinkers, which is what we're covering just now. See who else he's surrounded by and what. Not much. And this is the Bertrand Russell connection. So he had a big effect on Russell's epistemology, and also, same again, quite possibly again, and I think, it's just repeated a few times. Buckminster Fuller. I'd be interested to see if that's quite a long span, much later into 20th century, mid-20th century. Go on. Trivia was influenced by the works of philosophers like Plato, and Kant. So this is a frequent lecture at universities and design conferences done by Buckminster Fuller, very visionary architect, amongst other things, which received a Medal of Freedom in 1983. Yeah. Comparative theorisms. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Because not all of these. Here we got Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And he's influenced by Kant's political philosophy. Goethe, influenced by Kant's philosophy, especially his aesthetics. Neo-Kantian philosophy, that's just the name of the philosophy. And so philosophy of religion. Okay, just named. Friedrich Nietzsche as well. Bertrand Russell spearheaded analytic philosophy, advocating for logical analysis and clarity of language in philosophical discourse. And then we have the new pioneers who are in their time countering religious thought, such as James Fraser, anthropology, and also his interesting book, The Golden Bough, which has interesting ideas throughout. It doesn't say too much about it there. I've worked my way through that book. It's a product of many things, but his research laid the groundwork for modern cultural anthropology, and it was exploring the similarities in myths and rituals across cultures. And it influenced figures like Claude Levi-Strauss and Bronislaw Malinowski. Nonconformity doesn't always take a positive aspect. Adolf Hitler was a nonconformist in his own way, as he had there was previously quite an aristocratic rule. Here he is, down in the depths. Let's take a look at some of the ideas associated with him. Various things. Make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. From Hitler. 1921 until 1945. Eva Braun, Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler. Signing of the Treaty of Versailles, that was the reaction to that humiliation from the First World War. White supremacist groups continue to idealize Hitler and promote his ideology. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, minister of armaments. The day of individual happiness has passed, Hitler quoted in A Study in Tyranny. He rose to power in Germany exploiting nationalist sentiments and implementing policies of ethnic cleansing and totalitarian control. His regime led to the atrocities of the Holocaust and World War II, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. Let's go over to the Buddha's teachings, which were challenging tyranny. The people such as his cousin David Adder could well have become tyrants in their own right, given the opportunity. He was obviously a cruel person. And there were many other kings from around that area who could also have been tyrannical, because they were rulers of enormous kingdoms, and generally there was a warring caste system, and just there was a general theme of feudalism and invasion and expansion. And the Buddha brought his pacifism ideas and wise ruling in. He's got 10 rules of kings, which promote peaceful coexistence and harmony, and a less warring and challenging, invading, dominating attitude. He also internally challenged the Brahmanical caste system, and he offered a path to enlightenment through the Four Noble Truths. So it's more on self-correction rather than appealing to gods to affect the world and the weather and fortune and fame. And the Eightfold Path, which is self-remedial. Those teachings continue to influence both Eastern and Western thought, inspiring movements for social justice and spiritual awakening, particularly through the actions of some of the engaged humanistic Buddhists, including the Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and his influence in America. So non-conformity and challenging dominance systems via values. So various people have come through. Oscar Wilde is an example of someone who also used their mind only. And this is quite different because we're talking about a hedonistic person who was fascinated by the decadence and non-conformity in many ways, including sexual mores sexual mores and norms during the time of the Victorian. He's born in 1854 and he died in 1900. So vanity and decadence. He was a great challenger and someone who liked to exploit the inherent hypocrisies that he saw in people who were moralists and moralizers. And even the strong pressure levers to do with social engagement and improvement, the Salvation Army ethics, and people who were moralists of his time, the do-gooders and so on. He was saw this as an invasion of privacy, and what he wanted was that people would just do what they want to do perpetually. So, and then social hypocrisy was explored, and all forms of morally, or even though many of his plays and stories were aimed at moral of themselves, it was the hypocrisy and shallowness that he tried to challenge. So an interesting study. and he got himself in deep trouble because of the laws regarding homosexuality of the time. His famous last words were, "Either that wallpaper goes or I do." And then, so intellectuals using thought and public attention in various ways, and having their own influences, and television, which came along much later, can be seen through influential thinkers and voices. An Australian who emigrated to England, Clive James, who was a prolific writer and cultural critic, for example. Let's take a look at Clive. Attended the University of Sydney and Pembroke College, Cambridge. That quote there is partial. Common sense and a sense of humour are the same thing. A sense of humour is common sense dancing. It's common sense and humour are, and a sense of humour are the same thing at running at different speeds, I think was the original quote. And he emphasised the importance of cultural criticism for keeping the way that the popular media keeps power in check through holding it accountable via intellectual scrutiny. He was a prolific writer and a cultural critic, known for his wit and erudition across various genres. Highly recommend reading his works. Particularly one favourite of mine is called The Crystal Bucket, which was a collection of observations about television with the Observer paper. And here, again, a great advocate for free speech and intellectual freedom. It's that aspect which is very important. You notice where religion becomes too dominant, it also tries to control people's thinking and their minds, what they should and shouldn't think, say, do, and also just restriction and the suspicion of freedom. Influenced by F. Scott Fitzgerald, Marcel Proust, William Shakespeare, Mark Twain, Samuel Johnson, Salman Rushdie. Yeah, great thinker, brilliant mind, and very worth paying attention to. So far, thinking about the journey, you can recognize the interconnectedness of ideas across time and space, this challenging the independent use of the mind, which was one of the big keys of the Buddha. He was very much a free-thinking, inquiring, independent person, the kind of Sherlock Holmes of his time, trying to peer through the illusions and fears and conditioning of his own times, and the need to embrace diverse perspectives, engage critically with the history of the world as well. And through that we can kind of navigate the complexities of human intellect and contribute to this ongoing dialogue of ideas with East, West, ancient, new, contemporary, past, recent, and so on. So let's continue to look through some other links. people. One of the people I like to take a look at is Shakespeare. Perhaps we have to stop this one first before. Oops, doesn't seem to want to. There we go. Why won't you go? Or have you gone or something? What am I lacking here? Shakespeare, I think that's one of the other spellings of his name. Why are you not going to search? You are, you're going down there. I see. Okay, let's go without much further ado. We're in the Shakespeare dome. The quality of mercy is not strained. Love looks with the eyes, not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore a winged Cupid painted blind. If music be the food of love, play on. His sonnets are revered for their beauty and depth. Good. So, a pioneering playwright of the Elizabethan era, and he explored various themes of human nature, morality, and existentialism. So we don't often think about his mind and heart in those senses, but there's a great deal of truth in that. So in a sense, he's a philosopher himself. When you look at human nature and the paradoxes and the contradictions and the tragedies and the comedy and the ambitions and the tragedies and the downfalls and the politics of people, about their morality, the rights and wrongs, and through pondering the questions of existence, all the world's a stage. So these are ideas that then take place and influence people such as J.K. Rowling or other people who then go on to influence millions and millions of other people, positing those ideas forward. Love all, trust a few, do wrong to none. So it's another way of conveying the fault de Brutus is not in our stars, but in ourselves. So there's influence coming through. It's not astrology, it's in our choices. These are ways that influence comes through. Another person similarly was influential, though with Shakespeare we don't see a great deal of religious advocacy. Unlike with Dante Alighieri, who was exiled from Florence, but he was an Italian, he was very much involved with religious sentiment. And his inner cosmology was very influenced by religion. So the great Divine Comedy, divided into three sections, the Inferno, which means the oven, that's very, it has parallels also with some descriptions of what hell is like in Buddhism. So very conscious of actions creating a sort of punishment or reward. This is absent in more postmodern behavior, thought, and activity. So Dante Alighieri Dante, very much a man of his times, an Italian poet of the late Middle Ages. The Divine Comedy is a profound allegorical journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven. And again, in Buddhism, you also get these journeys. There are two books. One is called the Vimanavamsa, which is Vimana is a heavenly mansion, and one of the monks with developed third eye travels through and meets beings who are living there and asks them how they got there. And similarly, he goes through the Petavatu, which is the realms of the hungry ghosts, and asks the beings there, who are obviously living this terribly unfortunate existence with huge bellies, tiny pinhole mouths that can never be satisfied. It's very interesting. There are quite modern versions, digital animations and games that are of Dante, of his journey, with quite extraordinary graphics, very photorealistic, that depict some of these realms. So the allegorical method, where emotions and human sensations are depicted as monsters and places and representations, where humans can be seen frozen in ice blocks, or hungers and appetites can be seen as these enormous monsters with multi mouths that can never be satisfied again. So this kind of retribution, divine retribution for people who do sins such as adultery or slander and so on. Facing industrialization, the Romantics responded such as in England. It wasn't only in Germany that you had the Romantic response, but in in England, wandering up to the Lake District. Oops, what have we gone there for? We should find Wandering Lonely as a Cloud around the atmosphere. William Wordsworth. So he's a Romantic poet, a leader of the Romantic movement. So in that time and space, William Wordsworth's time, you had cities such as Birmingham expanding with mass production and factories and smoke. And then you had the mills of the Manchester region, northern area, Liverpool, and this was a shock to the sensitive, poetic vision of how life should be. So then you had this response, which was a little, in some ways, like the Buddha's reaction, which was go to the forest, go to nature, go away, be on your own and commune with nature. Close your eyes, meditate, be with your emotions and be within your meditation. Though the Romantics took a very different response to those emotions, and there's only a certain amount of parallel you can say about this, but the Buddha definitely advocated time in nature and dwelling in nature. He recommended this very much, but he recognized also that it's not everyone's temperament to spend their entire lives in the forest, because many monks wanted to study in the cities, and he gave them that option. Wordsworth lyrical ballads and the prelude celebrated the beauty of nature and the power of the human imagination. With the Buddha's teachings, we see an actual structure, though. We see a structured, systematic, deliberate offering. Bear in mind, he wasn't under any obligation to do that teaching. He could have just got the benefits for himself and just sort of sat there in his blissful mansion of nirvana inside himself and kept it all to himself. But very fortunately, he didn't do that. So there are many different parts to this, including the Eightfold Path. Just hit the brakes and then go again with our UFO over to where that is. Or the Eightfold Path. There's various different kinds. Here we have Venerable Sariputta. He uses a detailed explanation in this particular sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 9, Samaditi Sutta, on an explanation of right view. Just doesn't use the terms. Like you do get that with poets and romantics, as you get sort of quite vague, sort of quite creative versions on how to achieve happiness. But with the Buddha, you get very specific guidelines, very clear, numerical or numericized structures to refer to. So you get a great inner consistency rather than generalizations about oneness of everything, about interconnectedness or infinity or bliss, God in a flower or so on like this. You get very... you do also get some poetry, but you do get your clear structures. So it's not like, say, Jiddu Krishnamurti, for example, who I found the contrast there is he's just describing what it's like to be enlightened, but it's not giving any particular something that you can follow. Here, these are all clear categorizations that can be followed. Very specific. These are a bit of a pick and mix and that just refer to the Eightfold Path. The Maha Salayatana. Salayatana are the six sense medias, like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. So here you get like very specific things. We're talking about the Eightfold Path and right livelihood and right concentration, but how does that work with your eyes and ears, with smells? So very, very specific. So that's quite a contrast to the generalized romantic ideas that often you find. Here in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Eightfold Path. So I'm just taking one part of the Buddha's teachings, the Eightfold Path. It's only one part. A lot of reference and a lot of repetition. What's that one there? I think that one might be... Oh, these are all specific things to do with the Eightfold Path. And let's go over and take a look at some of those there. If we position ourselves about somewhere about here, you'll see all of these things that are relating, terms that are relating to the Eightfold Path come past and come round again. Right samadhi, right concentration, right conduct. So, for example, anyway, it's a little bit of a vague way to present these. It's just a bit of an overview and a way to give a rough contrast against some of these other Western Enlightenment thinkers. So Shakespeare reveals his intelligence and his intellect. Dante does so too, but there's a bit of a kind of a guidance there. Wordsworth celebrating nature. So Shakespeare using drama just to reveal what happens when you're not enlightened, as it were. And so they're taking different approaches to this, to the human life experience. Some just making sidewardly, oblique observations on human life, and other people making a kind of advocacy for a lifestyle. And then with Dante Alighieri, hell, purgatory, and heaven, it's a kind of cosmology. It's a kind of moralistic, moralizing. Actually, when you look at the Divine Comedy, I've worked through that, is you see it's his rage. He was exiled from Florence, and you see that it's not a very objective thing at all. He's livid and furious that he's living in exile, and he's bitter about magistrates that gave him sentences and things like that. It's much a description of his inner torment. Many of the people who are frozen in ice in these levels of hell are people who treated their house guests who came round for dinner a bit nastily or something like that. So it's quite a generalized overview. It shows also the Italian temperament and their interpretation of Catholicism at the time. The Eightfold Path, and then we've got such things as meditation, mindfulness, and compassion that are around today. Practices such as Vipassana. I mean, the use of the word Vipassana, which has kind of been hijacked by one of the franchises, the Goenka group, but the term Vipassana itself just means enlightenment. But this Vipassana movement, as I say, they've kind of hijacked the idea. In modern media, we've seen that come through in a documentary called The Dharma Brothers. That's a little bit different. That's about a Alabama penitentiary and how they introduced meditation into the prison there. Going back to the suttas, so we have Vipassana mentioned here. It's got the Digha Nikaya involved. And it's the Satipatthana Sutta is usually invoked and chanted, and it's one of the main places where Burmese Vipassana meditation traditions read and recite the Satipatthana Sutta. So, sorry to be a bit vague and general, but the Vipassana movement again. Anyway, moving along. So yeah, Vipassana and Zen, they focus on cultivating awareness and insight into the nature of reality. And they also are mindfulness techniques which encourage present moment awareness, not focusing off in the future, not into a sort of post-mortem and after-death experience, which is the case with some other cosmologies and religions. That seems to be a sort of prerequisite for something called religion, that it involves who created the earth and the world, and who created time, who created the universe, or what's going to happen after death, including promises of eternal bliss and also rescue by messiahs and so on. But the emphasis in the core of the Buddhist teachings is present moment awareness, and some non-judgmental acceptance of one's thoughts and emotions is a probably better version than Dante Alighieri, who is totally caught up in his thoughts and imaginings into a kind of schizotypal rage and guilt and remorse and churning and perpetual sort of sense of damnation and a enormous internal quest to retrieve this thing, his soul, you know. So, for example, that's quite different than having a non-judgmental acceptance of one's just thoughts and emotions and go, well, there it is, it's a thought. No, it's an emotion, and it's not me and it's not mine. There's quite a huge difference there. The non-judgmental part is a little bit suspect because there should be discrimination as well as awareness. You should be able to see this is an unwholesome state of mind, this is a wholesome state of mind, otherwise you wouldn't be able to make changes. Compassion and loving kindness. So compassion is very opposite to jealousy and very opposite to cruelty. And loving kindness is very difficult to a sort of warring attitude. So those are the key divine qualities that are fostered with empathy and altruism towards oneself and others. So to recap, Oscar Wilde, we've got aestheticism. It's all about playwriting, all about poetry, all about beauty, all about pleasure, and all about a hedonistic, indulgent life where morality doesn't involve only as a foolish aspect of human life, but this cavalier attitude to have reckless indulgence is this aestheticism. It's beauty without wisdom and also the paradoxes of truth. And this is very much opposite versus Buddhist detachment, which has a very strong moral component. His work, The Picture of Dorian Gray, explored the pursuit of beauty and the pursuit of pleasure. Couldn't be more contrasted to the Buddha's teaching, where he, I think I explained that already. We can contrast Buddhist teachings on the impermanence of beauty and the illusory nature of desire, essentially. Buckminster Fuller, we have technological progress on the one side with Buckminster Fuller with his geodesic domes and also his attitude towards earth. With Buddhism you have this harmony with the earth and particularly with nature and the forest. Fuller's concept of spaceship earth advocated for sustainable development and also global cooperation. It's a very visionary, future-oriented, utopian, somewhat, view. And this contrasts in a way with Buddhist views on the interconnectors, or it has parallels with the Buddhist views of the interconnectedness of all life, that we do have an effect and that we can take responsibility, and also the importance of ecological balance. So the cliche of interconnectedness of all life, we need to be very careful with that, but it goes without saying that if there is greed involved, if there's egoism involved, and if there's hate and selfishness involved, the ecological impact will be terrible. And there can be death and destruction and fire, you name it, napalm or nuclear wreckage and overspill. There can be brutal treatment and cruel treatment of people, and there's no limit to that. So without those things, we'd have wisdom, compassion, and loving kindness in authority and our relationship to the ecology. Thomas Sowell is someone we didn't really yet look at. Let's just this is interesting regarding humanistic aspects, because we shouldn't make too many presumptions about what that means, and also we need to be shrewd and wise, not naive. And someone who certainly looks with a lot of wisdom into many of the assumptions of what it means. Originally a socialist, and then became disillusioned and became realistic via economics. Intellect is not wisdom. The least productive people are the ones who are most in favour of having meetings. Criticise the role of intellectuals in promoting utopian schemes. He was influenced by economists like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek. When you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them falsities. Yeah, he was a great believer in intellectuals being held accountable for the ideas and the effects of them. And so when there have been great ideals about equality and everything, he was quite critical of this. Particularly, you got things like communism and many sort of anarchic sort of ideals that sound great on paper, but in practice, when you look at history, something else altogether manifests. And he wrote extensively about race and ethnicity and emphasized the importance of economic literacy and education. So individual liberty versus this sense of Buddhist interdependence. He's a very interesting person to take heed of. Rather, when you have ideas such as the romantic ideas about oneness, easily this turns into political dogma if we're not careful. And also those are interpretations of Buddhism, all about equality and oneness and so on. And we need to be very careful about what the Buddha really actually said before we start making assumptions or wishful thinking. Because the Buddha was very wise, and he was not always, he wasn't an unrealistic idealist as well. Sowell's advocacy for free markets and limited government emphasized individual responsibility. This is also something, he wasn't in favor of welfare states, which he saw as having a negative, unintended effect. A lot of liberal policies he saw as having unintended negative consequences, even though they were started off with good intentions. And this is contrasted with Buddhist notions of karma and the collective responsibility for societal well-being. So this is a case in point. Another rationalist of modern times, Christopher Hitchens. So he's been like the Buddha in that he was the Buddha was up against a theocracy of sorts, where the Brahmins were in the courts, they had the king's ear, and they had policies in their ancient texts, the Rig Veda and the Vedas, where that was controlling all of society through class distortion of what class and birthright really is. Beware the irrational, however seductive, and shun the transcendental, and all who invite you to, I think, obeisance is the next part of that. So Hitch wrote a book called God is Not Great, where what he is criticizing is largely Abrahamic monotheism, and what happens when that becomes a dictatorship, when religion becomes a racket, was another article I read by him, where religion that is essentially a con to terrify children with the image of hell, to consider women as an inferior creation, is that good? So the usage and abusage of religion, distorted religion, these are kind of thoughts and observations that the Buddha could have made. He was in a time women were oppressed by the religion. Whole classes of society, the untouchables and so on, were also kept that way with no social mobility because of the religion. The animal sacrifice, this sort of fictional way which just abuses animals through killing them, torturing them, and that is supposed to have this consequence of appeasing these great big Brahma gods, and then when they're happy they then give blessings and stuff. The Buddha was he didn't become emotional in response to this. He just clearly and rationally gave an alternative, and including lodgings and clothing and education for millions and millions of people since. That's also a difference between people like Hitchens and the Buddha. Hitchens was purely an intellectual journalist and a sort of social advocate, but he was a smoker all his life. He drank quite heavily, and he died of a throat cancer because of the smoking. But a fierce debater and a skilled rhetorician. He could speak and argue extremely convincingly and hold his own up against people such as the many religious dogmatists who are used to not being challenged at all, but he would use a very sharp wit. So he was against Abrahamic religions, but also others such as Joseph Smith's Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, and so on. And he criticized them and accused them of being a scam, essentially based on fiction that was, or even lies, deliberate lies in many cases. So rationalism, in Christopher Hitchens, we see rationalism versus blind faith. So this has some parallels. And Hitchens' atheism and critique of religion challenged two things: dogma and superstition. This contrasts with and compares with Buddhist emphasis on faith as a means to transcend suffering and the necessity to cultivate wisdom. We looked at Clive James, and let's just pop back to Clive James. Shouldn't be far away from Hitch. They're both journalists in that sense. Look at that while I'm reading through. I like that. Art is not a matter of life or death. It's more important than that. Art is not to do with me. It's to do with us. Clive James, cultural critique versus Buddhist acceptance. James's literary criticism and cultural commentary reflected on the human condition with wit and insight. And this can be contrasted with some teachings on acceptance, non-attachment to worldly phenomena. So one is to be very engaged and the other is to be totally passive, fatalistic. When you see the sort of toxic Buddhism, which is not practicing properly, often it is too detached. So there's a kind of contrast there, that non-attachment to worldly phenomena. Another person who's had a go at harnessing Buddhism and getting engaged in the discussion and into generally the intellectual milieu is Russell Brand. I've seen him a couple of times on the Dalai Lama and with Jordan Peterson discussing. And this is a little bit crowded. I'm just going to expand it so it's easy to read and zoom out. Let's go to the top of the pole area where it's moves a little bit slower, easier to read as it goes around. So Russell Brand's an interesting study. No, I don't think he engaged in passive activism during World War One. I think I was looking at this. I think this has got mixed up with Bertrand Russell. I think there's been a bit of. I'll have to. Oh, it is on Bertrand Russell. Oh, because no, Brand. I don't know if I know. There's been an error. I think there's been a bit of an error there. I think I thought that had been loaded in, and it hasn't. I was going to say. I don't think Russell Brand is in there. Never mind. Celebrity Western Buddhist. Actually, no, he is there in a small way. But not in the full Monty, as it were. So I thought I'd loaded in the Russell Brand thing, and I haven't. Not to worry. But he's combining activism and spirituality versus Buddhist compassion. And I remember when he was talking with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama was giving a bit of a ticking off because he was getting a bit of a rum reputation, as you'd expect. He's quite facey, he's got quite an attitude, and so on. So that's, par for the course in a lot of celebrity circles and television media people. And he's got that kind of accent as well, facey, but he's articulate and bright, and he's gone through a bit of a journey from addiction to spiritual awakening, and that has also inspired a message of compassion and social justice somewhat, and this contrasts with Buddhist practices of loving kindness and engaged action in alleviating suffering. Another person who's gone through a bit of a journey like that, Jordan Peterson. Here we go. Jordan Peterson. Now he's really become quite a public icon in this sort of world of much more competitive, more people to choose from. He seems to have sort of made himself a bit of a platform. strong Christian and a Jungian, and also influenced by Jung's student Erich Neumann and Nietzsche. A lot of furious intellect. Not furious isn't the right word, but powerful and active. Jordan Peterson, all about self-improvement and meaning. So you'd think there was a lot going on with parallels with Buddhist wisdom there. Peterson's self-help advice emphasizes personal responsibility and the search for meaning. And this also contrasts well and compares well with Buddhist teachings on the nature of suffering and the path to enlightenment. The Buddha doesn't talk about meaning directly, but it's inferred, and the kind of emptiness of certain ventures in life based on craving, chasing pleasure, and the vanities of the bonfire of the vanities, as it were, is all in there, but it's not pinned quite in the same direct terminology. And of course, you get someone like Jordan Peterson, and they're discussing Jung and Nietzsche and modern life. They're discussing Canada and the university systems. They're discussing with Camille Paglia. These things can't be done by Buddha, because Buddha's 2,500 years old. What we have are the principles, the teachings. That's what we have, and reports. But he's very Christian, very theistic in that sense as well. But he's emphasizing the role of moral, and he's got this strong missionary zeal to rescue the youth and give them support towards meaning, which is noble in itself. But I mean, to me, I've got his book here, the meaning maps of meaning. I flipped it open and immediately stumbled across tons of stuff from Erich Neumann, who to me is enormously confusing, who's trying to blend, on the one hand, ancient Egyptian cosmology, Osiris, Seth, and Isis, and sort of Freudian and Jungian meanings to do with rebirth and reincarnation, and then archetypes. And I mean, I think that's, talking of maps to meaning, I think it's an enormously confusing, relatively compared to the Buddhism, much more confusing. I don't recommend Erich Neumann to anyone. I know that many people like it, even Buddhist monks, some like it. I waded through some of his famous books, Discovery of the Unconscious, and the Great Mother, and I just found it, half of the book was about ancient Egyptian mythology, and half of the book was about Freudian ideas about formation of the individual ego consciousness in an infant, and trying to draw parallels between the two. I think it's confusing, a frame of reference, personally. That's just my 2 cents on it. So, as an overview, we could look about synthesis and reflection. There are common themes and divergent paths, exploring human nature, ethics, and existence. Both Western and Buddhist philosophies grapple with fundamental questions of existence and the human condition. Using that comparative analysis, we can gain some insights. Contrasting perspectives can shed light on different approaches to achieving wisdom and leading a meaningful life. B, there's the influence on modern thought and society, so the impact on intellectual discourse and the cultural paradigms. Both Western and Buddhist ideas continue to shape contemporary thought and societal norms. Then there's the application of philosophical principles in daily life and global challenges. In daily life, as opposed to being too abstract. And the global challenges, working as a bigger whole about global warming and recognition of the effects of pollution and what we can do. And lessons from both traditions offer guidance in navigating the complexities of the modern world. How much we can and can't apply of Buddhism into the year we're in. Thank you very much. I'd like to leave it at that for now. Thanks once again for joining me on the journey, and many blessings, and I wish you peace and protection.